As the first light of a chilly November morning filtered through the window of my Providence courtroom, I looked up from my desk to see a figure step forward that stopped time in its tracks. Arthur Pendleton, 62 years old, stood in front of me with no lawyer by his side. His coat was frayed, its navy blue faded into a dull gray from years of wear. Beneath that worn coat, he had on layers of thin shirts, doing his best to hold on to whatever warmth his frail body could muster. His mismatched shoes, the left one a worn sneaker and the right a busted loafer, caught my eye first. His hands were clasped tightly together, shaking slightly from the cold that still lingered deep within his bones. I took a moment to look at the case file sitting quietly on my bench. Expired parking meter, unlawful loitering, $150 ticket. For most people, $150 is pocket change, maybe the cost of a dinner, but for Arthur, it was an insurmountable mountain. "Good morning, Mr. Pendleton," I greeted, my voice calm, trying to break the uncomfortable silence. "How are you doing today?" Arthur lifted his gaze, not with defiance or anger, but with exhaustion. A man who had fought a losing battle for too long. His voice cracked as he spoke, the sound of someone who hadn't spoken to anyone in days, maybe longer. "I'm okay, Your Honor," he replied, his voice raspy. "I haven't eaten in 2 days." The words hung in the air, heavier than any legal charge. The courtroom, usually filled with the rustle of papers and hushed voices, fell completely silent. For a moment I couldn't even hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. This wasn't just another case. This was a man who had fallen through the cracks of a system built to protect, but too often to punish those without a voice. The ticket before me wasn't just a fine for a meter violation. It was a punishment for existing in a world that had no place for him. Arthur's eyes were sunken, his shoulders hunched as though he was carrying the weight of the world. He wasn't standing before me as a criminal, but as someone the world had left behind. "Mr. Pendleton, you're here for an expired parking meter and loitering charge. Where exactly were you parked?" I asked, breaking the silence. Arthur shuffled his feet, his gaze lowering to the floor. "Behind the old bakery on 4th Street, Your Honor. My car. It's a 1998 Taurus. The heater doesn't work, but it's the only thing that keeps the wind off my bones. I fell asleep, sir. Didn't mean to overstay the meter, but honestly, I didn't have the quarters to feed it anyway." The honesty in his words was devastating. He wasn't trying to cheat the system. He was simply trying to survive the night. "How long have you been living in your car, Arthur?" I asked, my voice softening. 4 months, sir," he replied, "since the textile factory shut down. I came up here hoping for some day labor, but my back gave out. No one wants to hire a man who can barely stand." I leaned forward, my eyes scanning his ticket once more. This wasn't about a broken parking meter. This was about survival, and this was about a man whose dignity had been trampled by the very system meant to protect him. With a heavy sigh, I asked, "Arthur, when was the last time you had a warm meal?" Arthur hesitated, as though the question itself brought up a feeling he had buried deep within. "A lady at the shelter gave me half a turkey sandwich on Tuesday," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But the beds were full, so I had to walk back to the car, the cold. It makes you forget the hunger for a little while." My heart ached as I looked around the room. The prosecutor, always so diligent in her pursuit of penalties, was now frozen in place. Even the bailiff, a man who had seen it all, lowered his gaze to the floor. It became clear to me that this wasn't just a case about a broken meter. It was about the human cost of poverty. Arthur was not a criminal. He was a victim of circumstances beyond his control. I looked at the ticket again, $150. A fine for existing, for not having enough. I could not, in good conscience, impose that penalty on Arthur. "Mr. Pendleton," I said, "you've been without food for days. You're living in your car and you're cold. I know this fine might seem small to the city, but to you, it's insurmountable. The city of Providence won't be pursuing this fine." I could feel the prosecutor's shock as I made the ruling, but I didn't care. In my courtroom, justice isn't just about the law, it's about compassion. "Arthur," I continued, leaning forward, "you are free to go, but before you leave, I want to make sure you get something to eat. You haven't eaten in 2 days. I can't send you back out there to face another night of hunger and cold." At that moment, I called on the Philomena Fund, an emergency fund we've set up to help those in need. It's not funded by the city, it's funded by the people in this courtroom. I handed Inspector Rossi a $20 bill, asking him to get Arthur a hot meal, but the compassion didn't stop with me. A mechanic in the back row, who had been silently watching the proceedings, stood up. Without saying a word, he walked to the front and handed Rossi a $10 bill for Arthur. Then an elderly woman, her face filled with concern, stood and handed over a handful of crumpled bills. "For a hot bowl of soup tonight," she said quietly. Soon, others followed suit. Small donations, each one an act of humanity. A warm breakfast, enough to get Arthur through the day. The kindness of strangers showed me something that day. It reminded me that the law isn't just about rules, it's about people. It's about recognizing the suffering of others and responding with compassion. But that wasn't all. I wanted to do more. I called a local auto repair shop owned by a young mechanic who had witnessed the exchange. "Can you fix the heater in Arthur's car?" I asked. "We can get it to your shop." The mechanic didn't hesitate. "Your Honor, if he gets the car here, I'll fix it for free." It wasn't just about a hot meal or a fixed car. It was about showing a man that he still mattered, even when the world had forgotten him. And then, as the case wrapped up, I made one final call to Sarah Jenkins, the director of a local transitional housing program. "Can you find a bed for Arthur tonight? A real bed, not a cot?" I asked. "I've got a room for him, Judge. Send him over," Sarah replied. Arthur Pendleton's journey wasn't over, but in that courtroom on that cold November morning, he was no longer invisible. He wasn't just another case. He was a man who deserved to be seen, heard, and cared for. And what followed, as Arthur left the courtroom with food, warmth, and hope, was a lesson for all of us. Compassion is contagious. The greatest act of justice isn't always in the ruling. Sometimes it's in the simple, small gestures that remind us all of our shared humanity.